Now, one of the president's executive orders that hasn't received so much attention is the so-called Defending Women from Gender Ideology Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government executive order. This was dedicated to addressing social conservatives' concerns about the treatment of transgender people in America. Now, one of those situations mentioned in the executive order was when there is a transgender inmate in prison. Out of the 140,000 people in federal prisons, that figure doesn't include state prisons or local jails, about 2,000 identify as transgender, according to the Bureau of Prisons. And until now, there was a process that transgender people could go through to potentially be housed in a federal prison that matches the gender they identify with. But not so many of them actually make that leap. Of the 1,300 trans women in federal prisons, only 10 were housed in female prisons in 2023. You do not hear that stat very often from the critics, do you? But the new executive order is going to end that process anyway. It orders the Attorney General to ensure that trans women are not housed in women's detention centres. Furthermore, it states that prisons should revise their policies concerning medical care to be consistent with this order and shall ensure that no federal funds are expended for any medical procedure, treatment or drug for the purpose of conforming an inmate's appearance to that of the opposite sex. Also, to be clear, in 2022, the Bureau spent only $153,000 in total on gender-affirming hormone therapy. So it wasn't exactly a budget buster. But if America is going to change its prison procedures, it might be wise to understand how the current system actually works. I spoke earlier to Dr Alix McLearen, who literally wrote the book about dealing with transgender prisoners. She led the drafting and implementation of the manual when she was the National Administrator for Women and Special Populations at the Bureau of Prisons.
So I think there's a myth floating around out there that, anybody in the world can go to prison or jail and just say, I want to go to this facility and boom, magic. And that's not true because that's not safe for anybody, whether we're talking about transgender issues or anything else. We set up a process. Are you taking classes? Are you volunteering your time? Are you doing something that is productive for you, that is commensurate with what staff recommend, what is good for your well-being? If you have any mental health issues, are they well managed? And pretty importantly to safety, are you staying out of trouble? If you're getting incident reports for fighting, it probably is not the best time to plunk anybody down in an entirely new environment that's going to garner some attention. Another bit of misinformation that seems to be floating around is that it's one person's rights at the expense of everybody else's. And I can't think of a time that I was ever involved with anything like that. That's not safe, nor is it kind or good or based in science. What's the layout of the facility? In the system that I worked in, we didn't have, say, group showers. We just didn't have those. But if you did, that might be an example of that's not a great place to move somebody because they're going to want some bodily privacy to not immediately draw attention to themselves. What other concerns are there? Is there somebody there that they shouldn't be around for some reason? Who knows what it might be? So we're looking at the big picture. We're making sure somebody has behaved well and managed themselves well and taken their medication and taken the logical steps in a transition that made this a good next move for their personal well-being without doing any harm to anybody else.
Okay, and what happened to trans women and trans men prisoners after they were transferred? Were they kept in special environments or were they just treated like every other prisoner?
The goal would be maybe not exactly that they're treated like every other person, because I don't know that anybody's treated exactly like anybody else, but that yes, that they join the milieu, if you will, and are able to feel good that, if they are identifying as a woman, that they are now part of the female population.
Did you ever catch someone who was faking being transgender because they just wanted to be transferred? And how hard is it to spot a fake?
When you look at the many avenues available to people to do something bad, because I would assume your motivation was bad if you were faking it to get a transfer. I mean, that's a steep hill to climb. So You want to go to a female facility so badly, you're going to take hormones and do all these things and live your life in a way that is not true to you for a year, sometimes years, just to get there when there's females that work in your facility every day. That it seems insane to me, but also I never saw it happen.
I was also surprised to discover that the Bureau was only spending $150,000 a year on gender-affirming hormone therapy for all of the 2,000 transgender prisoners. That's only $7 a year per trans prisoner. Was that because you guys were selective with who was allowed to have hormone therapy, or was that because not many trans prisoners wanted hormones?
Again, it's almost like we're making a Mythbusters list here. One concern that you hear from people is, oh my gosh, it's taking up all this money to treat people who identify as transgender. No, it isn't. When you look at the variety of medications and the variety of health problems that you see across the spectrum of people in correctional environments that warrant sometimes expensive medications, like let's look at something like hepatitis C treatment. That can cost thousands of dollars a month. It's just not that costly. And anyone that wants to take medication meets with a prescriber. And so if there's not contraindications and it makes sense, they're going to be prescribed it. I can't say every single person that wanted hormones got them, because that's probably not true. But maybe there's a contraindication medically or something like that. But it wasn't something that, especially once people got used to the policy and the language and everything, that was a frequent problem, that people were being denied hormones on the long term, and certainly not as a cost saver or anything like that.
Now, Doctor, there are so many Americans who have been really concerned about trans women prisoners, in particular being transferred to a women's prison. That's at least the cliche you hear about on the news. What would you like all those people to know?
It's a falsehood that there is some or one or a group of big burly men putting on lipstick and sneaking their way into women's prisons because they want to rape people. It's just not factual, and it's so easy to disprove. Has a transgender person ever been accused of engaging in some kind of misconduct or violence, sexual or not? Yes, absolutely. But I'm not aware of a single case where a person said they were transgender, got to a woman's facility and started assaulting people and was not really transgender and got convicted of a crime. Not one.
And now that the system you spearheaded is about to be cast aside by the new administration, what do you think's going to happen? Do you have concerns?
Yes. Yes, I do. Kind of back to almost repeating myself on safety. When you make a policy about something, it's this multidisciplinary group of people, both at the leadership level and folks that represent the bargaining unit, the line staff. And you're coming in there and trying to figure out what is the best way to give guidance to our staff that promotes the best interests of everybody involved. And so a lot of energy went into that. If you just rip the carpet out, what happens to everybody? One, if you lived at a female facility for many years even, and suddenly you're yanked over to a male facility and you look very feminine, you're going to stand out. You're certainly at risk for assault. I mean, look, we could talk research all day on the rates of assault of people who are transgender in prison, but suffice it to say there's a risk there. But there's a risk to staff too. Any violence there could be someone caught in collateral damage. What if somebody self-harms? Talk to some people and think about how it's going to work instead of just make a drastic change without thought, because people can and do get hurt.
We are just about out of time, Chas, but before we go, an update for